We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orachaim, Siman Samechet that we started. And today we're going to discuss something very interesting. Of course, we know that much of our minhagim in Tefillah follows the Ari Kadosh, and Arizal actually had a lot to say about this Ramah that we just read, of whether or not a person is allowed to read historically later additionals of Tefillah. For instance, we have the Vidui of Rabbeinu Nisim Gaon in the Tefillah of Yom Kippurim. Do you say it? Do you not say it? That's a much later, it's not part of the Tefillah that Chazal were metaken, or the Piyutim that Rabbi Yehuda Levi, others instituted. Do we say it or not? Now, the Maran Shulchan Aruch over here said that the Piyutim that they say, Nachon nimloa mile omram, shouldn't say them, because it's hefsek. The Ramah said that the minhag is to say them. Yesh omrim, dein isur bedavar. Rabbeinu Yonah says it's not asur to say them. And therefore, the Ramah says, v'chen noagin, that's the minhag to say them. V'hamekel, ve'enu omram lo yifsid. It says also, if you don't say it, it's not a big deal. Then it says, mikol makom lo yasok b'shum davar. When people are saying those mizmorim, those piyutim, you should not be doing anything else. Even learning Torah is not a proper thing, which we're going to discuss in just a moment. But this that the Ramah says, that a person should not be mebatel de minhag, ועל כן אין לאדם לפרוש עצמו מהציבור במקום שנהגו לאומרם, should not separate yourself from the tzibur. The Mishna Berurah Chafetz Chaim says something very interesting. He becomes mekubal here. Says the Mishna Berurah, Umorenu Arav Chaim Vital, the Marchu, the legendary student of Ari Kadosh, writes, this is in Shara Kavanot, in Nusach HaTfilah, Shelo haya omer, that Ari Kadosh would not say Piyutim uPizmonim ela ma shesidru harishonim. He would not say any of the Piyutim or Pizmonim aside from those that the Rishonim wrote, not the later editions. Kegon HaKaliri, HaKalir, those he would say. Because Kabbalistically speaking, those are aligned with the message of Tefillah. Famously, Ari Kadosh would not say Yigdal Elokim Chai. That's therefore the Ben Ish Chai is not for it, even though that the minhag of many communities has been to say Yigdal. So what do we do with that? Umikol makom, now just hang in 1 second, you'll see that's very much more complicated than you think. Umikol makom, he'ir beno shel morenu harav, Rab Chaim Vital. But interestingly, the son of Rab Chaim Vital, Rabbi Shmuel Vital, he says that Kishaya shaliach tzibur b'kahal b'yamim noraim, that Rab Chaim Vital himself will be the shaliach tzibur in the kahal in yamim noraim. Haya omer kol haviduim v'chol hapiyutim. He would say all of the viduim and all the piyutim, even though that his Rebbe Ari Kadosh was against them, he would say them. Now, before you draw any conclusions from this, because you'll see it's a stira just in just a moment, the lesson Chafetz Chaim takes out of this is the Shema Chacham, a wise man would hear this, umimenu yikach chochma umusar. You learn musar from this. Shelo leshanot haminhagim, not to change the minhag, even though that he was against it, his Rebbe Ari Kadosh was against it. But when he was in a kahal, that was the minhag, he wouldn't change the minhag. Now, it's not so pashut, because Rav Yaakov Hillel, in his Tshuvot Vayashov Hayam, in Chelek Aleph, he writes, in Siman Chet, I believe it is, he writes that it's a stira what Rab Chaim Vital used to do. You see different things from different places, because, for instance, the same son of Rab Chaim Vital, Rab Shmuel Vital, he writes in Shelot Utshuvot Ber Ma'im Hayim, in Siman Yutet, he says that his father would not say any of these piyutim when he would daven. So Rabbi Yaakov Hillel says, wait a second, on one hand, is the edut that he would say. So it's the stira, right? So personally, I would say, well, we have a stira. You just follow the halacha because it's not clear, these things. And he speculates there. It's not like a clear answer. He speculates two different answers. He says perhaps he respected the kahal when there was a minhag and he was shliach tzibur in a different minyan, not his own minyan. But when he had his own minyan, he would follow the basic halacha that would not say any of those piyutim. Right? I would say, well, you have to follow the basic halacha. But Chacham Ovadia says, well, already this has become a minhag. All the kihilot, we say these things. We say the piyut of Rabbi Yehuda Kalir. We say the long viduya of Rabbi Nisim. And that's important thing also to keep in mind. Now, Chavadia says, and this is so true, Chavadia says that, you have so much emotions when a person says the piyutim of some of these geonim, and you say the viduya of Rabbi Nisim, so people cry, people really is emotional, and that's part and parcel of what the Yom Kippurim is all about. And therefore, a person should be careful, says Chavadia, not to be lightheaded when it comes to these things. You want to be careful about it. Ben Ish Chai also writes the same thing in Rav Ba'alim, is Teshuvot in Chelek Dalet, Siman Lamed Hey. He basically writes that basically, even though that Ariya Kadosh was against this piyutim and viduim, nevertheless, our minhag is not like that. Even though that we bend our head in front of Ariya Kadosh when it comes to these things, our minhag has already evolved and developed, that we say them, says the Ben Ish Chai, and therefore, the viduya of Rabbi Nisim Gaon, you should say, the piyutim that are printed in the Sidurim, you should say, again, we don't say them in Birkot Kriyat Shema, we either say it before Shacharit, or we say it after Chazara. This way, you don't have those problems necessarily, or you minimize the problems, but nevertheless, it's important to say it. We say the piyutim, and people draw inspiration from it. There's hitorerut of kedusha, and that's worth something. It's when you say the vidu, and everyone is crying, and everyone is doing teshuvah, that's really some essential part of Yom Kippurim, not to be taken lightly. The Pelioetz goes as far as saying there is chas v'shalom sakanat mita. He says to deviate from any of this minhagim that we have is a sakana. You should not deviate at all from the minhagim. Again, aligned with what the Chafetz Chaim says, that we take this minhagim very seriously, and it's not the proper thing to change, and to be lightheaded to change the minhag. We're not quick to change the minhagim. Okay, says the Chafetz Chaim in Shibolei Aleket, in Siman Chavchet of Shibolei Aleket, this is Herich b'shem geonim shemitzvah lomar piyutim. He says the geonim right, it's mitzvah to say this piyutim. Uchshepiyet Rabbi Elazar chayot asher hena merubaot lekiseh v'chulei chatat esh sevivotav. Says when he brings b'shem the Shibolei Aleket, that when the piyut of chayot asher hena merubaot was said, there was fire surrounding Rabbi Eliezer. It is a tremendous thing, is not to be taken lightly. In Sefer Akedat Yitzchak, one of the famous Svarim, he also says how important it is to say the piyutim. And he says that the proper preparation for tefillah is hitbonenut, in thinking in the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is accomplished through saying the piyutim. If a person really pays attention to the songs that we say, to the piyutim that we have in the course of tefillah, much of it is really a proper preparation for proper tefillah. Therefore, he says Sefer HaKedat Yitzchak is very important to say the piyutim. Okay, so these are some basic things. But on the other hand, you have to be careful not to do things that are not the minhag. Now, he says that there are Shnei Masar, this is a famous one as well, that there are kishnei masar sha'arim b'shamayim neged shnei masar shvatim. There are 12 different pathways, gates in Shamayim, each one of them corresponding to one of the shvatim. And says the Mishna Berurah, v'chol shevet yesh lo sha'ar u'minhag levad. Every shevet has, every sha'ar has their own minhag, have their own pathway of connecting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore it is important to keep your minhagim and not to change them. Well, in Yandina, says the Chafetz Chaim, halachically speaking, Ashkenazim mitpalelim im Sfaradim or lehefech. When you are Ashkenazi, find yourself in Sfaradi Minyan, or vice versa, then yatzu yedei chovat tefillah. You are fulfilling your tefillah, even though that the nuschaot may be different, the piyutim may be different. You're still doing the basic yedei chovat, the basic fulfillment of your obligation. V'chol ze rak b'minagim shnagu b'shorshe tefillah. Aval ma shenizkar b'gemara u'b'divrei poskim. Things that are in the Gemara is for everyone. But things that evolved afterwards in time of the Geonim and early Rishonim, those the Ashkenazim have their own minhagim, Sfaradim have their own minhagim based on where they were and the ups and downs of the community that they went through. You find in Tisha B'Av there are many different kilot for Ashkenazim based on what they went through. Sfaradim basically stick to the more older literature of the Kinot and Echad. So again, every community based on their own minhagim. Now, what do you do if you find yourself in a different kihila with a different nusach tefillah? Imagine a Ashkenazi that comes to Sfardi minyan. Does he daven Sfardi or does he daven Ashkenazi? Right. So I am friendly with the Mishpacha of Moshe Feinstein. So one of his grandchildren told me that whenever he would go to the Sfardi minyan in the Lower East Side, he would go and pick a Sfardi sidur, and he would daven Sfaradi. When he was with a Sfardi minyan, he would daven Sfaradi. Now Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says you don't have to. If you are a Sfaradi, you daven Sfaradi. If you're Ashkenazi, you daven Ashkenazi. Even if you find yourself in the minyan that's not aligned necessarily with your nusach atfilah, still could keep your nusach atfilah in the private parts of the tefillah. But things that are out loud, that's a different tshuva already from Moshe Feinstein in Chelek Bet Sivachav Gimel, I believe it is. He writes that the things that are said out loud as part of the tefillah tzibur, you have to be aligned with the tefillah of the tzibur. So if their kaddish is different, you don't say Sfardi Kaddish in Ashkenazi minyan. Well, even though the Nusach Sfarad, even the Hasidim have the same Nusach Kaddish that the Sfaradim, the Hamizrach, when you're in a regular Ashkenaz minyan, you don't change. When you say, Nakdishach, and they say in the Kaddish, it's different Nusach. You follow, if you're saying it out loud, you follow the Nusach of it you found, and that's what Rav Moshe Feinstein says. Now, Chacham Obadia and Or Tzion, Ben Zion Abba Shaul, they write that you should not change your minhag of tefillah in nusach tefillah, even if you find yourself in a opposite minyan, Ashkenazi minyan. You still should have in Sfaradi, they say, opposite of what Moshe Feinstein held. Say, and you tell me that it's lotit good. The Gemara says in Masechet Yevamot Daf Yud Gimel that you should not have different minhagim in the same kihila, in the same tzibur. Says Chavadia, that's talking about a regular kihila. But Sfaradim and Ashkenazim, it's known already that Sfaradim have different minhagim, Ashkenazim have different minhagim. Everyone knows that everyone is okay with it. And therefore, it's not a transgression of lotit kodedu just because you're davening to your own nusach. And no. Out loud, you should say your own, whatever it is that they're saying, you should not confuse them. It's not a proper conduct. And also, it's not derech eretz. But nevertheless, your nusach tefillah, you should keep, and it's not considered a transgression of lotit kodedu. And Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu writes the same thing. So this happens to be pretty consistent with like Rav Shlomo Auerbach as well. then you're not obligated to daven with them. And he says, but you have to be careful not to, disturb other people, right, with their tefillah. So therefore, if you are, a chiyuv of Kaddish, for instance, you're saying Kaddish, and you want to become a shaliach tzibur in the minyan of Ashkenazim, Rabbi Yosef says, if the kahal agree that you should daven Sfaradi, then okay, kol hakavod, do it. You want to do Sfaradi Havara, if they agree, fine. And some communities do. But if they don't, if they're not okay with it, then sheval tas adif. You don't have to become the shaliach tzibur and change your nusach. Daven as a regular person in the tzibur, don't become shaliach tzibur. Daven your own nusach. But Or Letzion says you're rashai, you're allowed to become the shaliach tzibur and daven with the nusach of the Ashkenazim. But the quiet part of the tefillah, you say with your own nusach, says the Or Letzion, the loud part of it, like Chazarat Shaliach Tzibur, and the Kaddishes and Kedusha, you say with nusach Ashkenaz, and there's no problem. So that becomes kind of like the Machloket Chacham Ovadia and Rabbi Shaul. And if you are a Shaliach Tzibur in the Ashkenazi Minyan, that they read the Megillah of Shir Shirim and Kohelet with bracha, right? And Pesach and Shavuot, the root, Shir Shirim Kohelet, there Chavadia says you're not allowed to say the bracha because that's already Safek Brachot La'akel. That becomes a much more serious thing. And again, for Arvit also, the bracha Yiru Enenu, if you become Shaliach Tzibur, you're not allowed to say that bracha either. Fine. So, as we mentioned before, the Or Letzion says that if you're saying Kaddish in the Minyan of Ashkenazim, then, you should, well, for a regular tefillah, you should follow their nusach. But says Or Letzion, the Yatzmach Kul Kaneh V'Karev Meshicheh, that part of it, you should say like your own minhag, but in Yehesh Berabah, you should make it shorter, like the nusach of the Ashkenazim. So, because one of them has literature behind it, Yatzmach Kul Kaneh V'Karev that's more important, and therefore you should end saying it right with that nusach. But the Yehesh Berabah, you could shorten it like the Ashkenazi minhag, and therefore, if the tzibur are makpid, that the Kaddish should be exactly like their minhag, then you should say the whole thing like Ashkenazim. Because Darkei Shalom, you don't want to create machloket. It's their minhag, the majority, and Khatam Sofer has a tshuva like this also. Khatam Sofer has a very sad situation. This is, I think, printed in Chelek Vav of Shuvot of Khatam Sofer in the Choshen Mishpat, the Hashmatot of Choshen Mishpat in the back, in Siman Kuf Bezayin. If I'm not mistaken, that's where it is. And the story that he was asked was that it was pogrom, because they kicked out majority of the Jews. They had to leave the city, and they had two massive communities beforehand, one very large Ashkenazi shul and one very large Sephardi shul. And now the remaining Jews in the city, it's not enough for them to maintain both kehilot. It was not, no way. They had to combine the minyanim in one of the shuls. So they asked, what minhag are we going to follow? So it says the Khatam Sofer, a very interesting tshuva. Khatam Sofer says, well, you combine the minyanim, you go after the majority. If the majority is Sfarad, you go Sfarad. If the majority is Ashkenaz, you go Ashkenaz. But then he has, he has a twist to it. He has an addition. The extra caveat is, says, Bezrat Hashem, when they grow, the community grows again, and there's enough for every community to have their own, then they separate. In other words, it's not like Batel B'Shishim, Batel Berov, that now they became Sfaradi or Ashkenazi. When they will have enough, and this seems to me to maybe it's not Pashut, but maybe it stands in contrast with Maram Bet Yosef's tshuva in his Shut Afkat Rochel, is in Siman Tetvav, Rashut Bet. The Maran there holds that the Ashkenazim who come to Eretz Yisrael, the majority back then was the Sephardi Kehila, and the Ashkenazim wanted to have their own shchita at some point. The Maran says they're not allowed to. One says they're batel, kama batil, as they have come little by little to Eretz Israel. They become batel because they didn't move as a massive community. They came little by little, and therefore they're not allowed to change the minhagim of the country, and to have their own shkita, which is different, their own bedika of terefot that's different, and so on. So that's a very interesting and large sugya to discuss. Certainly not for a short talk like this. And Bezrat Hashem will continue this in the days to come.